Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Choose Optimism podcast brought to you by Optimist International. Today, we're talking with Reick from the Gilmore County Optimist Club about members and money. But first off, Corey, thanks for being with us today.
Hey, I appreciate it, Shane. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast and to try to help the other members of our club worldwide to get more money and members.
So, one of the things we talk about on this podcast, we always bring it up. It's the very first part. What is your Optimist story? Tell us how you got involved with the Optimist organization.
Well, my wife and I built a vacation home in Ellijay, Georgia, which is 75 miles straight north of Atlanta. And in an effort to go meet people, I joined various clubs, the Chamber of Commerce. And one of the things I joined was the Optimist Club. And I didn't really know honestly what they did when I joined, but I realized learning that they help, kids and they help families, it really spoke to me. And I was inducted in September of 21. And, almost immediately it was suggested to me that I be on the board. And I said, hey, I don't live here. The timing's not right. Well, then we sold our house unexpectedly because of the offer was too good to turn down, and we moved up here full time. And so I couldn't run from that anymore. And so in early 2023, the person that was supposed to take over as president couldn't do it, and with 6 months to go, I told him I would do it. And I also told them that I'm going to do two things. We're going to focus on money. I'll get you more money than you've ever had, and members. We're going to get you more members than you've ever had. And so that's it. Not even 4 years I've been a member.
So let's talk about that, your program, members and money, a little bit. Let's break that down in the year you were club president. So let's talk first about membership. What drives that member or drove you to recruit more members?
I so when I took over, the treasurer said, "Hey, you have very, very limited funds." And we'd lost 15 members. And so right away I realized, hey, I have to not only stop that progression, but I wanted to accelerate it. And I wanted to get people in our club to take a mindset of abundance rather than scarcity. And so the more that by this time I'd had a couple of years of experience, and I realized this is a really unbelievable club. And and I'm sure this happens, everywhere, but in Gilmore County, there's 400 kids, elementary school kids that either don't get anything to eat on the weekends or don't get enough. And we largely fund that program. And so the more that I got into this, the more that, that particular initiative spoke to me, and we developed various ways to fund this. But when I took over as president, I didn't really know anybody in town. And so I made the commitment to not only was I going to get, you know, money from the people in town, but I was going to tell our story. And so, for instance, I would go to a business owner that I didn't know, hey, my name's Reick. I'm the president of the Optimist Club. I want to get to know you, but I want you to understand what we do at our club. We help families and kids that are struggling right here in Gilmer County. And now 90% of whatever we raise goes right back into the county in forms of scholarships, in forms of helping those kids get something to eat in the weekends, school supplies, and so on. And I realized I would, I think I could really help the club if everybody that I was asking money for, I told that story to. And so, not everybody wants to join, but it's, you're casting. And, you know, every person that I asked for money from, I told that story to. And I just made it part of my presentation. Hey, we've got different sponsorship levels, but hey, maybe you should come to a meeting. You should really see what we do. And if they gave me money, I would say to them, or the club money, I would say, hey, you really should come watch this event. You really should come watch what we do. And it just became sort of automatic. Um, and I love what the club does. I think that comes out, when I'm meeting people and I'm trying to raise money. And I have a lot of experience raising money, so it's not that difficult for me.
So you focused on some key points that your club was actually doing to promote the goodness that they were doing in the community.
Yeah, I realized that, one of the first things I said I would do before I became president is I said, hey, I'll do a golf tournament. And people said, well, how are you going to do that? Well, I played golf for the University of Iowa from 1983 to 1987. And my wife and I have helped raise money for the Leukemia Lymphoma Society with Team in Training for 25 years, running marathons and half marathons. And so we've raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for that initiative. So it doesn't bother me to go ask somebody for money, especially when with Team in Training, helping kids with leukemia and, this, helping kids that aren't getting enough to eat. It's a pretty easy sale. And I decided that if I was going to be successful, I would have to get money from every business owner that I could, but also tell them the story. Because if they didn't want to become a member, maybe they had their managers become members to talk about, to build relationships and talk about their restaurant or their construction company and so on.
It seems like a pretty easy sell when you talk about kids in general. I mean, and just breaking it down to the simplest form really makes it pretty easy to promote what you're doing to raise money and to recruit members.
Yeah, in my presentation that I did for Dr. J, Diana Johnson in Murfreesboro about a month ago, there's really three main points. One, you have to believe you can do it. There's no getting around it. In anything, if you don't believe you can do it, it doesn't matter what your action plan is or, what your assessment of past performance is. And so I tell the story of something that made a big impression on me, and that's the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team when they upset the Soviet Union in the semifinals and ended up winning the gold medal. Well, they were playing professionals. The Soviet Union was professional. They were professionals, and they won the gold in 64, 68, 72, 76, and they were destroying NHL teams in hockey. And so we upset them. And I remember after that uh, game, my dad pulled me aside and he said, hey, I want you to understand something. Our boys had no business beating that team. That team, they're professionals, and this is all they do. Our boys are college kids, but the reason that they won is they listened to their coach and they believed and they worked harder than probably any other hockey team. And so they were able to do that and made a big impression on me because at that time, my father just said, hey, if you believe you can do it, you're probably right. If you don't believe you can do it, you're probably right about that too.
That's a huge key point there. I mean, just even thinking you can get things done is kind of a mental barrier to get over. I think a lot of people struggle with.
Well, and I told the club, I said, you have to realize, okay, you know, Herb Brooks, who was the coach of the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team, he took a team of college kids and he pushed them harder. They were in better shape than anybody in the Olympics, but they believed. And, you know, I told the group, I said, hey, I have good news for you. You're not playing the Soviet Union tomorrow. You're just asking people you know to tell a story you already know. And so it's much simpler. And so, the upsetting the Soviet Union in 1980, it's one of the biggest upsets in the history of the planet. And but to set it up and say, hey, these were professionals, they were destroying everybody. And in the 4 or 5 games prior to playing the United States, the Soviets scored 50 goals in 5 games. I mean, they were just a machine. So, and it was a really tall order, but it wasn't too tall for our guys because they pulled it off. But believing, it's really important. And I hear people say, "Well, I can't ask people for money." Yeah, you can. You have to believe you can do it. And okay, listen, not everybody tells me yes. Very few tell me no, but not everybody tells me yes. So I do face some rejection with, asking for money. But when
Which
I
you know what no stands for, right, Corey? Next
not
opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I had a client tell me one time, he said, Rick, he said, no to everybody else means no. No to you means maybe.
That's a great
So,
way to put it.
well, so I started off with the first thing I wanted to do for the club. I said, look, I'll do this golf tournament. And it ended up happening in September of 2023. I didn't know anybody. I promoted it for 10 months. I started in October of 2022, and we raised, I think we netted right about 20,000 or $21,000. But the other thing that's important when you're raising money is to not spend money, to get in-kind donations, to get advertising donated, to get food donated. And a lot of people, they don't want to ask, restaurant owners or, people that own things, they don't want to ask them for free stuff. And so what I told them is, under my watch, I said, we're not paying for anything. We're not paying for anything. And so, you know, we did pay for some things, but we don't rent venues. We didn't buy any food for the golf tournament. I got all of it donated. And so, if you don't have any expenses, you put more in your pocket and you can help more kids and more families. Uh, and I enjoy that part of the process. And so now, we've had three golf tournaments. We recently had the third one, actually August 6th, a few days before I gave this talk in Murfreesboro, and we raised another 20,000. But I have a list of about 200 people that have given in the past. So it's a little bit easier for me because I have my target list, and I'll call up and say, hey, Shane, Corey, Rick calling, hey, just calling about, the Optimist golf tournament, wondering, you know, if you want to sponsor at the same level you did last year. And most all of these guys and gals I know. And so, Shane might say, well, what did I do? I said, I think you gave $20,000 last year. And there'll be applause. And so I have a lot of fun with it. But people really like what we do. They like the message, and everybody up here loves golf. So, talking to people about money and members is, it's almost second nature for me.
So, like you said, and we're breaking it down in the simplest terms. You're just describing the club's mission of what you guys are accomplishing. Let's talk a little bit about the membership side of stuff because, like you said before, if you don't have members, your club's not going to be very active and survive, even if you have the money to do things.
Well, you think about, I think when I took over, we had 92 members. We ended up with 111. And so we were plus 19. But that's not the full story. We brought in 38 new members and 19 people. Some people moved away and some people just decided it wasn't for them anymore. So we added 38 members and 19 left. Well, that's just it. Some people are probably going to leave every year for various reasons. So you always got to be prospecting for members. And to me, I have these 200 people that I interact with, and if they don't come to a meeting or if they don't join, I say, hey, come to this event. Watch what we do, and keep telling the story. But with the members, you have to always be getting new members, and you have to keep them engaged. You have to give them. To me, you have to get them involved in something very quickly. Hey, we have this thing, we raise money for the kids to get something to eat. It's called Sack Pack. We have this stuff, the bus initiative, which helps us raise money for school supplies. We have the golf tournament. We actually have a tennis tournament. And so maybe which one of these things speaks to you? So once you get the members, that's not enough. You got to train them and get them engaged and get them moving.
What are some of the points that you have when you're recruiting membership? What are some of the points you tell them the club does? Or is it the same story when you're asking for donations, or is it something a little bit different?
I think it is a little bit different with each person because people say, well, listen, I know you help kids, but what specifically do you do? Well, Shane, you might be aware of this, but we have about 400 kids in the elementary schools that aren't either A, aren't getting anything to eat on the weekends or aren't getting enough. And then I wait and watch the reaction. And most people go, in other words, they're getting with the idea that they're going to give a donation. And I said, that's one of the most powerful things that we do, but there are other great things we do. We give scholarships to kids, that have done well scholastically. We have the grant program for people in the community, and we help kids get school supplies. And so, there's a number of things that we do, but it doesn't mean anything if we can't get more money. And so, most every one of these 200 people now that I follow up with, they know it's coming. They know what we do. And they say, hey, I can give a little bit more this year, or hey, I can't give as much because of this or that. But they know that I'm going to call. They know that they're going to give something. And it's a little bit easier that way. But I'm also looking to expand my reach and meet more contacts.
What is some advice you would have for a regular member that maybe has some difficulty asking somebody to join or somebody to donate money?
Well, I think what I would do, you got to believe you can do it. And with that person, I would sit and I would probably spend more time on the hockey story that I spoke about, and why it was such a huge upset, why it was so incredible that the United States, that our kids beat the Soviets. And and my dad used to say to me before I had a big golf match or a big game or something, he would say, gee, are you nervous? And I would say, oh yeah. And he goes, I got good news for you. He said, you're not playing the Soviets tomorrow. And then we would laugh, and he was right. It wasn't whatever I had to do back then wasn't a tall order like, our kids, playing the Soviets on February 22nd, 1980. But I try to encourage them, and I would say to them, hey, start off with somebody you know. Okay. Go to your place of business. Go to the people you have coffee with, and say, hey, here's what we're trying to do. We're looking for donations for Sack Pack or the golf tournament. And, we'll take regular donations, even if you don't play golf, we'll take a donation. Here's an interesting fact. So I've got all of these different pockets and groups that I, hang out with here. And one of them is my coffee breakfast group. And this is a true story. So I went into my coffee group here at Mike's restaurant, and I brought our little brochure that talked about the golf tournament. This is about a month ago. And I said, hey guys, I just want to let everybody know, hey, we're having a golf tournament again this year. And, a bunch of people, and I said, I know you're going to say you don't play golf. And I said, hey, I got good news for you. It doesn't matter. You can give us money anyway for the kids and for people in Gilmer County. And so I did have three guys each give me $100 a piece. Well, one of the guys' names, I never knew his name, but I've known him for 2 years. His name is Duck. I don't know his last name. I don't know his real name. Okay, but he gave me $100 bill and I put it in the bank. Well, so the treasurer asked me, she said, you got a donation from some guy named Duck? And I said, yeah. He said, do you know his last name? I said, I have no idea. Do you know his real name? I have no idea. And she just kind of laughed and said, okay, well, we got a donation from Duck. Fantastic. So, we asked everybody in the restaurant, hey, here's what we're doing. We love your support, but we also want to make you aware that the Optimist Club helps families and kids, and 90% of the dollars raised stay here, right here in Gilmer County.
And that's a huge thing, knowing that 90% stays in there, because I'm sure that they're a little bit more apt to give, knowing that it stays with them and not going somewhere else across the country.
Well, and not only that, I didn't realize this until, a few years ago, but I guess there's a lot of organizations that raise money, and very, very little actually goes to the actual cause. And so we as a board decided a couple of years ago that at least 90% of the money needs to go to our Optimist charities and Optimist initiatives. And I think that's a good story to tell, because if I was giving money, and sometimes people, I've had people give me $10,000, and they want to know, well, where's it going? And I can say, well, I can't tell you directly, but 90% of it is going to go to one of these 4, 5, or 6 areas.
And like I said, that's a huge selling point when people know their dollars are going to stay local. What, so going back to the membership side of stuff, that's you can probably train yourself or train other members to be able to recruit for either donations or members. It's probably not that hard.
Well, I think it's hard if you don't do it. And I think everybody, a lot of people want to know, well, what's the silver bullet? Well, you have to pick up the phone. You know, um, I know a lot of people will send an email, they'll send a text, but if you don't get a donation, either they didn't get it or you have to call them and say, hey, Shane, I wanted to follow up on the information I sent you about, our golf tournament. Just wanted to know how much you wanted to give this year, and then just pause. And that person will say, oh, you know what, you're right. Can you come by and pick up the check? Or hey, do you have a link that I can hit and just put in the amount I want to give? But you're right. You would think it would be trainable, but a lot of people don't believe they can do it. And that's the first hurdle is this isn't it's not rocket science. You have to believe you can do it. And I would ask them, somebody that's struggling with that, okay, tell me about something you overcame. Tell me about an obstacle you overcame. Tell me about what your thought process was. Tell me about how you figured out that you could do it. And tell me how you did it. Okay. And then once they tell me that story, I said, well, this is no different. Okay. It's, all of the growth is in outside of your comfort zone. And I really like for people to, I really like to train 2 or 3 or 4 more people. Uh, but the majority of people that I talk to say I can't do it. It's too hard. It's not who I am. I don't want to do it. Whatever issue you want to plug in there.
We need to remind our members that growth is actually stepping outside of your comfort zone once in a while and doing something, and growing as a member inside your Optimist Club.
Well, I want to refrain from, it's different if you're in a company and you have employees. These are all volunteers, and so you have to tread lightly about how hard you push them. And I don't mind being pushed. I push myself, and so and it's a good thing we're doing. What we do as an organization, your club, national, any of the other clubs, they're all doing good things. And I think we're all kind of on the same page. And it kind of reminds me of that man in the arena poem or saying by Roosevelt. The credit goes to the man that's actually in the arena. And we're the men and women in the arena, because we're taking action. We're trying to help people that are less fortunate than us. And, some people are very artistic. And so they can make signs and stuff. Others, they can do various things. But to me, the most powerful things you can do for your group are to raise money and to get members. Um, and you have to constantly be getting new members because you always lose some. And if somebody moves away or if they get a different job in a different community, you can't really do anything about that. But you can always be prospecting and trying to add new members.
Well, Corey, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking your time to visit with our membership to inspire them to be better in their clubs, because that's part of what we're doing here is sharing ideas and advice to make clubs stronger and better within our Optimist communities.
Well, you know, I think if you are, this is a great thing. This thing we have with the Optimist, it's a great thing. And yeah, there are some frustrations. But I think, and we need people to coordinate too, people to coordinate events. You don't want me anywhere near that. I'm not any good at it. It's not my fastball. My fastball is money and members. And I just make it part of my daily conversation with people. Um, and so I don't I want to make sure the group is going to be okay for the long term, and I want to do whatever I can to do that. Um, but it's this thing we have. I think it's a great thing.
And you hit the nail on the head there. You point out that you send people to do the strength of who has the strength to organize stuff. Your strength is recruiting and members. Played a lot to your strengths, and a lot of things can be accomplished within an Optimist club.
Well, I think not only that, and not worrying about who did what. I think, I know the Optimist organization is big on pins. I probably got 20 or 25 of those pins. I don't even know where they are. To me, I don't want to say I don't care, but that's not the point. The point is we're helping a lot of people that are struggling right now. That's the point. And I totally believe in what Muhammad Ali. I was a huge fan of his. One of the most profound things I've ever heard in my life was, service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. And I believe that. And I believe if you're fortunate, you need to help those that are less fortunate. I think you have that obligation. And so, you know, I've had another one of my mentors say, it's you haven't done something until you've done something for someone that can never repay you. And I think they're right about that.
Well, like I said, Corey, I cannot tell you how much we appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge with our membership base, because that's what these podcasts were designed to do, was to share ideas and inspire other members to maybe hit that next mark that they're maybe missing, or maybe want to take that next leap and do something productive within their club.
Yeah, you know, I was thinking about this the other day. If you have 100 members in your club, what if every member could bring one guest per year? Now, you're not going to get all of those people, but what if you could just bring one guest? Everybody. And one of the things I used to say is, hey, many hands make light the work. You know, think about how powerful that is. You may not get 100 new members, but you might get 20. That'd be a pretty easy way to get members if you just invite one person. And, I think that another thing that I'm fond of saying is, hey, take less than you give. Take less than you give.
Which just goes to show, when you're recruiting members, you never know which member is going to be that new one that might be the next president of your club. I mean, there's always something waiting in there. I mean, there's a lot of information that we've covered today, but the message is very, very simple.
Well, I think, one of the things that I like about, well, of all the things that I like about the club, I think one of the things that, just being optimistic, having, believing that there's something in everyone. And, even if you don't believe it, have the discipline to force yourself to think that there is something. And, there's always, when I was president, there was always something more I could do. You know, I could get another member, I could get another donation. And, a lot of times when I thought I was tired, I thought, if I could be the difference in one kid getting more to eat or getting something to eat, then I have that obligation to do that.
Like I said, Corey, I cannot tell you how much we appreciate you sharing your message and your story with our clubs, because we are here to make a difference in our communities.
Well, it's been a pleasure being on your podcast, Shane, and it's been great getting to know you and Teresa. And, I'll help you however I can. And thanks again for having me on.